Hey everybody, welcome to, the Advanced Tactical Burp Suite webinar. We got a 2-hour session here. There's a number of you still signing in, and we're just getting started here. So welcome to today. Now, this is the second time we've offered this. The first time we ran it, we had a ton of problems with the display. Burp just wasn't behaving, things like that. And so for the people who saw the first one, they'll be going to get the recording of this one also. Hopefully we fixed all those problems.
And by fix them, we mean we moved to my computer instead of Kevin's.
Exactly. And we disconnected all of the secondary monitors that we had before. That was part of the problem. And now we just got told that we have degraded audio. Is everybody hearing us okay? Yep. Okay, good. Yeah, go to a meeting. Just popped up a little box that said, you may have degraded audio.
This thing's hot, actually.
What are you doing? So you can't see him because we don't have the video on, but James actually put a lab coat on so it looked like he was doing research or something, because he's one of those security researchers you hear so much about.
I can't do it, though. It's too much of the hot seat.
Too much of the hot seat.
That's right.
Oh, man. So, so we're going to get started today. Start with a quick introduction. I'm assuming that you guys, if you're on this webcast, you know James and I. You've either seen us other places or you've listened to a webcast, maybe even saw the first Tactical Burp instead of the Advanced Tactical Burp. I'm the founder of Secure Ideas. I'm the CEO. I teach classes, podcast, all that kind of cool stuff. Oh, man. This isn't my updated bio slide. It doesn't have my 501st number.
Sorry about that. You're 250th and a half?
Yeah, exactly. So that's okay. So that's me.
I'm principal security consultant at Secure Ideas. Get to do pretty much everything that needs to get done.
Pretty much everything I don't want to do, I assign him.
I get the emails late at night. Hey, can you do this? Because I don't want to.
Yeah. Matter of fact, last night you got one of those emails.
I know. That's why I use that as an example.
Tomorrow morning, could you get this drafted up so I don't have to do
Create
it?
a couple open source projects, work on a couple open source projects, podcast quite frequently.
I think you're probably the most frequent podcaster I know of.
I don't think so, but
you podcast multiple times.
I mean, we have a podcast at least once a week for one of them.
Right, one of them at least once a week, and then you do other podcasts. You've got the Develop Set podcast, which isn't on there. I wonder why that one's not on there.
Because it's not my updated. No,
that's a good one.
Sam's.
Yeah, that's a good point. So, man, you would have thought we could have updated the bio slides or something.
And also multiple blogs.
Yeah.
We like to voice our opinions a lot.
So. Oh, we have opinions.
That is us.
So, to get started, we're going to start very quickly with an introduction to web pen testing and burp and stuff like that. We know this is topics you guys should know, but we want to make sure that we're all on the same page as we move into all the rest of what we're going to talk about. Now, I do want to say, I didn't say it earlier, if you have any questions, any comments, stuff like that, please don't hesitate. Ask them, right? One of the things that is always a problem when you talk about quote-unquote advanced topics is what's advanced to you may not be advanced to somebody else and maybe so far above somebody else's head that it's ridiculous. And so we want to make sure that as you guys have questions and concerns, things that you think of, ask. If we've got some time, we'll try to answer any questions related to what we're talking about right then. And if you've got something you're curious about that we're not covering, we'll see if we can cover it, right? We're not going to promise to cover everything because we may not know, or we may just not have time.
I just might try to do it on the fly.
Yeah, why not?
I mean, we've got it pretty well scripted for the full 2 hours, but
really,
we can squeeze something in.
Really, scripted. There's anything we do that's scripted?
No.
Oh, man.
Nothing at all.
The only reason we didn't have to write these slides today is because we had already written them the last time we did this.
So feel free, use the chat window. I know we say voice your opinions, but or questions, type your questions.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Since we mute everybody except for us, just so we don't have the distractions of other noises in the background.
Yeah, we
besides our voices.
That's distracting enough. Yeah, one of our guys, Jason Gillum, just did an internal class for a company, and he didn't mute everybody because it was internal, and he said that somebody kept taking phone calls while they were on the thing, and he finally had to mute the entire class because the person's having phone calls with clients while he's on the call. It's crazy.
We try to do some things right.
Yeah.
Not many. So the first thing we have to do is we have to understand our attacks, right? Understanding the various attacks helps with security. It's hard to defend security aspects if we don't understand how those attacks work, right? So we have to have a slight understanding, at least.
Slight understanding?
A slight. You don't have to have in depth, I don't think. You're always wrong. But we want to have an understanding of how these attacks work, so that way we can not only do the attacks when we're performing pen tests, but also be able to provide good, solid recommendations, right, of how they can defend against these attacks going forward. Because we've talked about this numerous times, that there's much more to the pen testing side than just coming in and, hey, I got in and this is how far I got and that's what you paid me for. There's a whole consulting side to that and a whole nother realm of what we're looking for in there. So we want to be able to understand what these attacks are. And Burp, right, our favorite tool, is great for being able to look at the different types of traffic that are going on out there without doing anything malicious or anything actively. We can go in there and just watch traffic go back and forth so we can start to learn how sites work. We always talk about understanding how attacks work, but just understanding technologies and how those different technologies work together helps us then better understand the attacks. And often we overlook that idea, but one of the first things we tell people that are just starting to get into security is, hey, you really have to understand how the technologies work. How does HTML5 work? How does JavaScript work? WebSockets.
I'm amazed at how often I talk to people and they call themselves an application pen tester, and you start talking about HTTP and HTTPS and how the protocols work, and they don't know it. And it's like, well, I just had a question, and this is a question that happens all the time, but I happened to get it earlier today. This person asked a question about, hey, I'm trying to connect to this thing through Burp. I can connect to HTTP sites fine. When I try to get to an HTTPS site, the application fails. And so I wrote back, and they're like, well, why would that be? And it's like, well, because Burp is man in the middle in that you haven't trusted the CA cert and all that kind of stuff. And the response I got back from the person was like, oh yeah, of course, right? But they asked the question because they're not as familiar necessarily with how HTTP and HTTPS work, and they weren't thinking about it along those lines, right? They were thinking about it as it must be an application issue, not thinking about how the protocol works. So I absolutely agree. Understanding the attacks and the technologies, right? Everything is knowledge.
Yeah.
By the way, somebody just asked if they're going to get the recording at the end of this, and the answer to that is yes. We will be sending out. It'll probably be early next week that the email will go out. We'll send out an email to everybody. We send it out through MailChimp, which is the what do you call that? A mailing list software we use to service. Some people, it bounces into their spam folder. We get emails every so often, not a lot, but every once in a while, where people will say, hey, I never got that link. What you'll do is you'll get a link and credentials to download the recording.
Yep, and we'll send it out. It should be probably mid next week or so.
Yeah.
Sometime next week.
If you haven't gotten it by Wednesday, let's say Thursday, email us.
So the next thing we really need to think about is, what is the context? And you'll hear when we talk about security, context is key in so many different areas. You talk about cross-site scripting and you hear context, right? What context is it in? But even more than that, just the context of, is it an application? What does that application do, right? Whether you're testing a financial application versus a health application versus a job tasking application, right? What is the context that we're dealing in? Because some things that may be important to one context aren't important to other contexts.
This is where we think that a human tester is so much better than an automated tool, because we can take into account what the business does, what the business transactions in the application we're testing are, and then we can go from there, right? Then, of course, we have vulnerability context. Does this get split out in the next 3 slides?
It's a good question.
Here, let's try it. Nope. And so
it's a very scaled down power slot.
I always forget is how scaled this down this one. So vulnerability context, right? Understanding where the vulnerability is going to land. Like in the example I always give is, the difference between cross-site scripting and SQL injection, right? SQL injection is going to land back end on some database server, whereas cross-site scripting is going to land inside the browser. Right, and so understanding the target of that vulnerability, what you're attacking there, becomes very important, and that ties directly to the exploit context. Is where does the payload you're injecting into the vulnerability land? Like with cross-site scripting, where am I just landing in text on the page, or am I landing inside of an attribute, landing inside of a header, things like
URL,
that? Yeah, all of that kind of stuff is important to keep in mind. And it's one of those things where you're juggling that thought throughout your test, right? The entire time you're doing it, you have to be thinking about, what am I doing? Where is this landing? What does it affect?
So, and there was one question out there about specialized word lists.
Oh, yeah. FuzzDB is the most specialized word list I use.
Yeah, we don't really have any custom word lists that we use across sites. We might generate a word list from a site.
But, for a site, using cool.
Anything else is either usually pulled from FuzzDB, or quite honest, most of the time when I use word lists, it's the word lists that are built into Burp.
Yeah.
That we'll take a look at in just a few moments.
Yeah, because whenever you're using a word list, I don't know, I've never gone out. I've had that question before, and I've thought, am I missing something? Because so many people have asked, do you have a professionally evil word list or something? And it's like, no, I don't.
I do. It's in Webster's dictionary.
So Burp. How many people here? Well, I'm not going to ask that because I can't see you raise your hands.
Somebody already raised their hand.
Oh, there you go. See. How many people here use Burp all the time, right? How many people have a license? Or I guess I should say, how many people don't have a license, right?
Oh, a bunch of people took their hands down. They got scared. They were the only ones.
Nope,
it's okay. Everybody put your head down on your desk and close your eyes so nobody else sees your hand go up. We won't judge.
Awful.
So, I'm pretty sure that's probably what my wife does in class, so that you don't want to be embarrassed for raising your hands.
Right. And of course, since she's in, teaching kindergarten, what is it? Who peed their pants? How does that work? Well, we have to ask that in the office here because of Andrew and Donna. I'm about to get something thrown at me.
Probably. So, Burp, our favorite tool. There are other tools out there. The reason it's our favorite is more opinion-based than anything else. I know somebody out there is probably thinking, oh, Zap Proxy is the best thing in the world, or Fiddler or some other proxy is better. We're not going to sit here and say that, apples to apples, it's the best tool, but the best tool to me is the tool that you find the easiest to use to get the job that needs to be done.
Yeah.
And for us, that's Burp. And a lot of that has to do with layout. It has to do with the way that the functionality
Familiarity.
works. Yeah.
I mean, I've used Zap when it really got stable and effective to use it. I played around with it for a while, and it's got a lot of power. But I have to actively think about, where is that again? What do I click there? Do that, because I'm just not as comfortable with it. And I want to be very clear, like James said, it's not a fact-based thing, right? We're not saying Burp is better than everything else because it's better. We're saying that we're most comfortable with it. And talking to a lot of other professionals, I know very few professionals that don't use Burp in some way. And I'm assuming that everybody in this webcast either uses it or wants to use it, right?
I hope so.
Now, it is not open source, right? And that's something, Richard Stallman gets a hissy fit about. It is closed source and it is commercial. So there is a free version, and the free version works. If you want to try it out and test things, the free version is there. I think professionally, you better be using a commercial product. And not just because you should pay for it, you should pay for it, but because it's got so many cool features, including it's not throttling Intruder, right? Intruder runs very fast. You can search You can save and restore your state.
The
Those
engagement
alone,
tools.
the engagement tools. A lot of people like the active scanner. We will talk a little bit today about the, which is something we didn't cover in the last version of this because it wasn't available, but the DOM-based tests, right? That where it'll do some code analysis of the JavaScript, which is kind of nice, right?
Let's move on. So some of the components that we have in here, and if you're already familiar with Burp, you know these, but we have the proxy, so that way we can intercept our HTTP, HTTPS connections. Our Burp Spider, so we can crawl the application. Intruder, which is kind of our fuzzing capability within Burp. Repeater, so we can repeat requests that we have to try out some of our attacks without having to worry about going completely through the web UI and loading all the auxiliary nonsense that most applications deploy these days. You'd be amazed how fast the site comes back when you don't have to load all the CSS and JS and
Jeez.
What
was that one? Well, I
It should come up
what
with-
was the one site, but remember that one site you just recently tested, and it was like there are 29 other sources of JavaScript or something.
It was ridiculous the amount of stuff that came back on it. It actually was difficult to test because of all the junk that came back.
Exactly.
They need to come up with a new extension, the CRAP extension, and put all that stuff underneath it.
So is the CRAP extension used by the application security specialist?
Yes.
Okay.
We also have the sequencer, right, so we can analyze our session tokens. Our decoder, which is pretty key, so we can decode values that are out there, whether it's URL decoding, base64 encoding. So if you see some value like authorization headers for basic authentication, we can actually go in and decode those to see it. And then we also have the comparer, which is pretty cool to be able to compare either requests or responses. This comes in really handy if there's something very, very minute that's different between two responses, for example. Common example I usually give with this is username harvesting, because if we're looking at, well, what's the difference between the messages that come back? Sometimes it's not as subtle as, oh, well, this one says username's bad, this one says the password's bad. Sometimes it's something very small that when you go in and compare, you can actually see a difference in the response to be able to identify username harvesting. So that comes in really handy when you're doing that, to be able to see that. So that apparently wraps up our slides. And into Burp we shall go. Now, keep in mind that we do have a live environment available for this as we go through. Also keep in mind that the URL you're going to see on my screen is different than the URL that you're going to use. I'm using vuln.professionalevil.com, which resolves only internally here at the Secure Ideas headquarters, whereas you should be able to go to pvuln.professionalevil.com to be able to get to this. And this is just a Matilda instance that we've got installed up there. A few caveats that we want to cover as we start going about this. We do want you to be able to follow along, test some of these different things out, test out this application with Burp, see what things do, but keep in mind that there's other people out here on these same sites that are doing this as well. So we don't want we encourage you not to attack others or anything, right? Don't throw cross-site scripting in there to screw with other people.
Well, throwing a cross-site scripting there with like a simple pop-up, no issue. But throwing a cross-site scripting in there that launches a beef hook to take control of their desktop, probably rude.
I don't know. Get 44 people to put a pop-up on there, and you might get annoyed with the site after that. We can always stop it and restart it, but I would prefer not to have to do that during the assessment or this training session that we have going on.
But if we have to, we can. So let us know if for some reason it's not responding or anything like that. But you should be able to get to it at pvuln.professionalevil.com. Did you type that into?
No, I did not.
Oh, okay. You might want to make that to all attendees instead of one person.
Don't worry about it.
Just saying.
I'm
trying
on
to
it.
help you out. Trying to help you out. Now, obviously, there is a link to reset the database. Please don't click that. If you click reset the database, it'll delete all of the accounts that everybody signed up. I do recommend that you all register for an account so that you're playing with an account you control for your testing.
Yeah, rather than just trying to use one of the accounts that exists and start stepping all over each other, right? That's the last thing we really want to do. So that's the site we'll be using. Most people have seen Matilda, I think.
Yeah,
It seems so.
and this
should
is
be somewhat familiar with it.
Right, and keep in mind that when we're done with the webcast, we will be shutting off that pvuln site, but Matilda is available inside of Samurai. You can download it separately and install it so that it's running on a server you control, so that you can use processing. And a couple nice features about it, it actually has hints. It's got different levels of security, right? You can actually toggle that so it's more secure. So as you get better at testing something, you toggle the security to start making it more difficult to attack. Right.
All right, so that'll be the target that we're using throughout these session that we have today. So we'll pull up Burp. I'm going to shrink this down for a moment so we can actually come in and start looking at Burp. I'll let Kevin talk about his favorite tab.
Jerk. So he always makes fun of me because when I first started using Burp, I was using it alone, right? I didn't have somebody else working with me. I've got all these excuses as to why I was stupid. And I fixated on the target tab. I spent all my time in the target tab, and I was at a presentation that James was attending back when he was a stalker instead of an employee. And I made the comment that I spent
This was like 2 years ago, dude.
It wasn't that recently. I made the comment that I spent all my time in the target tab, and he was like, well, why? What about the proxy history tab? And I'm like, I don't know about the proxy history tab. Hence, he makes fun of me now every time we come here. So why do we go to the target tab other than to make fun of me?
Talk about the target tab.
Oh, okay. So I don't think it's very interesting. We've already loaded a number of things into Burp. We've browsed around. You'll see that we've gone to Vuln. We also went to an internal IP address 10.42.0.38 and loaded stuff that way. It's the exact same thing. Doesn't help you guys because hopefully you don't have access to that IP address. But
if you do, please let us know.
Yeah, let us. Well, if you have access to our version of 10.42.0.38, let us know. Right? And
don't worry. This will be the one time I'll give you the break. If you let me know that you have access to our internal right now, I won't press charges.
No, you didn't say I wouldn't. So we've loaded all this up, and we've already gotten a number of things out here that are available to us. And the reason we did this was that so as we start to move around, we've got things preloaded. And I know that you guys are all familiar with, the gray means it hasn't been visited, but there's a link, and the black means there's a request and a response. So we can actually see here was the request, here was the response. No big deal there, right? Now, a couple of things we want to talk about here is one of the big things that we run into while we're dealing with complex applications is session handling. Now, something as simple as, hey, I've got a cookie and I've logged in and I've authenticated. Now, you'll notice on the screen that I've got here, notice that cookie PHP session ID equals this, right? It starts to go around. Once we log in, which I don't remember if you logged in while you were testing.
No, I didn't.
Okay, so let's do that. Let's come back over to Firefox, right?
Yep.
So come back over here. We're going to register for an account. Oh man, I hate those. See these pop-ups? I understand that people like them. They drive me crazy. So I'm going to just click hide pop-up hints. And so now, well, once that goes, now we no longer see those pop-ups. No big deal. It's going to register an account. And we're going to call the account Jardine, right? And he has a really, really secure password of password. I mean, it must be secure. It's 8 characters, right? And then we're going to give them a signature of I am a Nerf target. And I'm going to create the account.
Yes, you are.
So now we want to sign in. So we're going to click back on login and register. Come here, Jardine, and if I remember my password, I'm going to log in. Now notice up at the top of the screen, it says Jardine, right? And I am a Nerf target. No big deal. We've got all the information we need. So let's bump back over to Burp, come over to the proxy history. If we come all the way down to the bottom, you'll see that we now have, there's our login with the password, and then we've got the submit. And so this just went up. Our response, because we successfully logged in, we've got 2 cookies being set. The username equals Jardine and the user ID. And then you'll notice as we go to any other page, right, we're going to send those cookies up, right? The Jardine and the 19. And so we've got all of those. Now, another thing that I'm going to do real quick, because when we're mapping an application, we say, see how it says showing all items? We're going to get rid of images, other binary, CSS. Make sense? And it just makes this list a little bit smaller for us to deal with. Notice I kept JS files. I still want to see those. I still want to see PHP files, all that kind of stuff. I do want to see Flash objects, because if a Flash object comes down, I'm going to want to see that. And the other binary will catch things like if you're dealing with the 4 sites on the internet that deal with Silverlight, you'll see it there. If you're dealing with an app that still uses Java applets, that'll be under other binary. We're just going to leave it there right now. Okay. So one of the things that we see a lot is now we've got that cookie, right? Remember the cookie that came down on this page, right? Now, as we start messing around with things, sometimes our session will expire and we'll get a new session as we're browsing through with our browser, our true browser. But then when we start playing around with Repeater or Intruder and things like that, we'll lose that change in session. For example, if we were to log out, log back into somebody else, or we actually see sites that have a maximum session timeout. So even though the session is active, right, the tool is interacting with the website, and so you have active session requests, it's going to time out. And then the next request that comes in, it's going to reestablish a new session ID. Well, what happens is, by default, Burp doesn't pay attention to cookies that come back in responses for any tool other than the proxy. That's by default, right? And so if we come in here, and I believe it's options here, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, right there, sessions, right? So we actually have a cookie jar, and this is where cookies are stored. And notice, I did lie. I was wrong. The spider is the other tool that by default will update the cookie jar, and that makes sense. I never use. Do you ever use the spider inside of Burp? Me.
Don't use the spider.
Does anybody use the spider inside of Burp?
I got arachnophobia.
You have arachnophobia. Really? That's where you're gonna go? So one of the things here, and it's actually a pretty simple thing to do, is to just click, hey, as you're dealing with Repeater, if you get a new cookie, update the cookie jar. And then that way, if you're doing something in Repeater, because we spend a lot of time in Repeater, if you do something in Repeater that changes the session cookie or one of these other cookies, maybe in Repeater, you find a way to do SQL injection to log in as somebody else, and you get back a cookie that's UID equals 1 and username equals admin, where you're going to want to have that update for the other tools to now have administrative access. So you would check Repeater. You may also with Intruder. Now, I tend to not update the cookie jar with the scanner or the Intruder because they have a higher likelihood that they're going to do something that messes up the session, right? Maybe I've seen cases where they push in a payload that the display of the page it comes back gets screwed up, and so you don't have all the menu options available to you or something like that. And by having Intruder and Scanner update the cookie jar, now everything you're dealing with has that updated, messed up session. right? So I tend to stay away from that. You do have the ability to say open cookie jar and actually get rid of cookies and everything that's going there, right? You have access to that. You can edit things and deal with it. So that's actually the biggest session handling benefit. You do have rules that you can set up that we can say, hey, you know what? I'm going to say edit. We can actually change a rule that we actually add, use cookies from here, or set a specific cookie. One of the things that's nice to do is if you're testing a site that has two-factor authentication and you get back a session ID and the two-factor authentication uses like a client app that won't let you intercept the traffic, well, you can set that in your browser and then go over to Burp and give it the cookie, right? You can actually have it check to see if the session is still valid, and you give it a page to go access to see if that's there, right? You've got macros you can do, or you can actually invoke various Burp extensions. Personally, I don't end up using any of the rules other than if I've got some weird authentication where I have to do that externally to Burp and then come back into it, right?
Rarely do I even use the cookie jar, honestly.
I end up using it quite often with the repeater when I'm messing around with stuff, because I've seen enough times where, but that's pretty much the only additional place.
This is because you're too slow to
That
keep
might
the
be.
session active.
That might be. I'm so slow and lazy. And we just got another question. Yes, you will be getting a recording of this.
We should just put that. We should just insert that every 5 minutes.
Because people come in and they didn't hear us say
Yeah.
this when I was first
There
started.
will be a recording of this. Just put it on repeat. So we have lots of other functions that are pretty cool, and what Kevin has a list of here. One of the cool things that I wanted to talk about, I mentioned earlier the comparer, where we could go in and actually look at and compare like two different requests or responses, but we can use the comparer for much more than just requests or responses, right? I can take any text and send it to the comparer. So while most of the time we're dealing with, hey, I'm going to take this entire response and send it to the compare. What if there's just one specific little thing that you want to compare? Maybe it's the session ID that comes back. Maybe, for example, a view state that comes back or something like that, right? Something that's too big to type in manually, but you want to be able to compare it.
So view state's too big to type in manually?
It is, yes. Well, technically it's not too big to type in manually.
Thank you.
But it could be a pain. But what we can do if we go into our history tab here and just pick some text, right? If we took this text right here, we can actually say to this, just send this to comparer, and you'll see that it's actually that text that's there. And then we could go into a different one and send it and say we don't select it all. Hopefully these are two different ones, and that comparer. And if we compare with words, and hold on, mine's gonna fail because I've already done compare once today.
That is something that drives me crazy. Just so you guys know, if you get that, it hangs right there with the progress bar. Just hit cancel and try it again. It's good that you put that cap back on.
Wow, that just scared me. Yeah, so here we can see, I mean, right, we've turned this into a diff tool of more than just the requests and the responses. For the longest time, I've only ever used it for requests or responses, but I can actually select any text, and I mean, I could go to a different document if I wanted to, select, and then you can actually just paste whatever's in the clipboard into the comparer to be able to compare that value. So if you're always in Burp, right, there's a good chance that, oh, you came across something different, you want to compare some things, you can throw it in there. Just like Decoder, how we can throw different things in Decoder, right? It's using these tools and understanding some of the cool tricks you can do with them, that it's not just the whole request, the whole response.
Right.
Let me pick a portion and just look at these two differences.
Yeah.
Because some items are pretty big.
Yeah, and trying to deal with that. Now, one of the new, since we're talking about the proxy, we're talking about dealing with stuff, let's talk a little bit about Websockets. Because that is a new technology that people are dealing with. I will point out that I think we can still say I've never, like, the company has never run into a pen test that actually used WebSockets. Have you seen one yet?
I have not seen one that uses WebSockets yet. I can tell you if you want to see WebSockets. As you can see here, I happen to be actually, I had Burp running when I went to CNN earlier today, and the discuss.com site.
I always forget,
sends ridiculous. I mean, if you want to go see WebSockets in action, just go there.
I just can't see you as a reader of CNN. That implies that you care about the world around you and the news of it and stuff like that. No, okay.
I was looking for something else, and it just happened to pop up. Actually, I was looking for, I was looking for something different. And I do.
That means it was a politically insensitive thing he was looking for. He didn't want to cause a political debate on the recording.
I do read CNN.
You heard that, right? It was like, I was looking for something else.
I do read CNN because I curse every single time I go to it because of the pop-up displays that they have that move the entire screen down, then they move it back up. I'm okay if you want to display an ad, but don't move the entire screen or block the entire screen on me.
Yeah.
And the moving ones are the worst because I move my mouse down to try to click on what I want, and just before I hit the story I want, the whole thing starts moving back up again, so I miss it. So for WebSockets, we actually have a different address that we're going to look at to see these. So if we go to http://www.websocket.org/demo. Is it demo or demos?
Demo.
We'll try demo.html and see what happens. Oh, I didn't like that.
No, it's oops. Demos.html.
There we are, demos, yes. All right, so we can go in and click one of these. And so this is a nice little way to be able to test it just so we can see what they're doing. Oh, good. My browser supports WebSocket. That would have been unfortunate if it did not. So here we can send. Oh, we got to connect. And then we send. And then we see this response come back. Now, if we go back over to Burp, we can see here that there was two different WebSocket items that went through. We had an outgoing, which said rocket with HTML5 WebSocket. That's the message we sent up. And then, of course, the incoming, which just echoed it back, right? So it's the same value. But you can see that we saw both the incoming and outgoing. It's out on a different port, right? It's out on the 8080, which seems to be fairly standard as well. I don't do a lot of WebSocket work. I go back to the whole, you should understand the technology.
Now, what I find funny is that Burp displays it as HTTP:/echo instead of the WS: that you see when the JavaScript makes the request, right? A couple other things is these WebSocket calls do not get added to your proxy history. They're just in the WebSocket, like the HTTP history, they're just in the WebSocket history, and they don't get added to the target tab.
And you'll also notice that when you click on them, right click on them, you don't get all the options you get on a regular request. Right. I mean, see how few options we have here. I mean, we can add a comment, we can highlight, we can delete it, and we can send it to comparer, as opposed to over here. I mean, we can go out to Intruder, Repeater. Like, we can't replay the WebSocket requests that go out.
Yeah, the Burp's support of WebSockets right now is really more of a monitoring that they're happening and everything else like that. I've never tried to manually create WebSocket requests in Intruder, but I don't believe it would work. Or in Repeater, right?
Yeah, I haven't tried it either.
Yeah, and part of that is because of the handshake that happens. Managing that inside of the tool set just isn't implemented, right? But again, I want to go back to, I've never had a WebSocket request show up in a pen test, right?
Yeah, I haven't yet either.
And the last time I talked to the other guys on the team, nobody else had either.
So we don't see that yet, but I can see that coming. The more sites that start implementing them, I mean, it is a newer technology. So we should start seeing more of those starting to show up.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I lean toward.
You think it's a flop like Silverlight? Is that what you're saying?
I didn't say it's a flop like Silverlight, but that may be true. I think that as we see the move toward HTML5 and so many other things, I think that WebSockets was trying to solve a problem that has been solved other ways good enough. And there's such a difficulty in getting a WebSocket. So, it's not hard, but it's a process the developers have to go deal with. Like they have to go to the admin and get the production server set up. They have, right, beyond just deploying code. So I don't know. I think it's going to remain. But of course, the first time I saw HTML, I told people the web was going nowhere. That it was a dumb idea. We had Gopher and Telnet and bulletin board systems. We didn't need this whole web thing. So you can tell that predicting the future of technology is not high on my skill set.
There's a reason we don't see you in the stock market.
Right, exactly. So, but yeah.
Kramer over here on Mad Money giving advice on what's...
I could be Kramer because all he seems to do is yell. I could yell on TV.
He's interesting to watch.
Depends on your definition of interesting.
I guess. So some other cool things that we have in Burp outside of kind of Burp, the default instance of Burp are the extensions that you can do. And we've been able to write extensions for Burp for quite a while. It just was a little bit more of a pain to get them installed and running all the time. And now they've got the B App Store where you can go in and easily download and install these new apps. So if we actually click on the Extender tab, we can see a whole list. And I installed a couple other ones today. But all you have to do is select one of these. They give you some information. You want to do it. That one's Jython. I won't pick that one. JRuby.
So you picked two good ones really fast.
Even worse.
Just so you know, since you just kind of threw that out there and didn't explain it, Burp supports extensions written in Java, Ruby, and Python. But for Ruby and Python, they have libraries, the JRuby and the Jython stuff that's got to be installed also. Neither James nor I use extensions very much. And I'm
not going to lie, I don't use extensions at all.
I was being polite.
So I'm being polite by telling the truth.
Yeah, well, we don't use them at all. But so we don't have the Jython and the JRuby stuff extended, set up and ready to go. I think that extensions work well for people who like them. For example, Jason Gillum, one of our coworkers, he wrote CO2, which is an extension we're going to play around with a little bit today. And he loves extensions. He's constantly coming up with new ideas and everything else. And he's got some really cool ideas for mixing CO2 and laudanum. And I will say that when he gets those done, I'll use an extension. For that one purpose. He's got this idea.
He should call that Mentos. CO2 and Mentos, man, that's explosive right there.
Oh, that's awful.
That's what you get.
Is how much I like it.
That's what you get, folks. Jokes made up on the spot.
So so you can actually just go and install the extension that you're interested in, right? And once
right, like I said, it's very simple. You click on install. It loads. So if we pick oh my goodness.
Every single one you pick.
I know. I should have waited and not installed anything beforehand. Everything written in J. You just don't like yourself or something? I don't understand what the problem is.
There we go. We found one.
It requires Java version 7, though. I'm not sure if I have that.
Oh, man. There you go. There's one.
Here we go. So we'll just click install. Lots kill my Burp instance. Actually, I installed 3 of them earlier today, and it seemed to work okay. All right, so now it's installed. Notice now that up in the top, we've got a new tab, XSS Validator.
Yep. Not all the extensions add a tab, though.
Right. All the ones I've added, the 4 that you'll see checked here, all do have tabs, and they start after the alerts tab. And so CO2...
You can drag them, can't you?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay.
Move them around.
Like how he tried it before he answered.
I've never tried it. I don't
know.
So with the CO2, it's got a whole bunch of functionality that's built into it, starting with the SQL mapper command that it has. And basically what this is it's going to take the information that you'd normally be sending out and to SQL map, and it will actually generate the command line for you, except for the actual SQL map portion.
Right. So what we can do is we can actually say, come over here to the proxy. Let's go to that login because I happen to know that the login is vulnerable. So there's the post, and we can say, isn't it under send to SQL mapper request? Now, I'm really not sure why he puts parentheses request, since you can't send sending a response would not do anything.
Look, it's the same reason peanut butter has to say this contains peanuts.
You know what? When you said that on the way back from lunch today, I knew it was going to make it into the webinar, right? He was sitting there complaining, and I happen to agree with him how ridiculous it is that the jar of peanut butter he was using said this may contain nuts.
No, it says it contains peanuts.
Oh, it didn't say may?
No, it didn't say may.
That would have been better.
No, but if you buy peanut butter that says may contain nuts,
don't buy that peanut butter.
Don't buy that peanut butter.
So you'll notice here is the command line, right? And we've got the entire command line, except, like James says, it doesn't start with ./SQL map or SQLmap.exe or .py or whatever. And Jason made that decision, talking to him about it. I was like, hey, why not? He's like, I don't know where they've installed it. He's talked about adding a configuration option where you could say, this is where my SQL map is. So this won't actually launch SQL map, right? You have to cut and paste this out, but it actually comes in. Okay, here's the URL, here's the post data, here are any cookies that were available, so you can actually edit them. Like, let's say, for whatever reason, we don't want the show hints. We highlight it, we hit delete, right? We can also set the risk level. You'll notice the command line just changed. We can come in here and say, I want the current database, I want passwords, I want to know if we are a DBA, I want to know what roles are available, and I want account. And as we look, I'm going to slide this out because I know you guys can't see the go to training window, but it's in the way for me. We have level 3 now, current DB, passwords, is DBA, count, and roles, right? And so we're actually getting back. Now, by the way, this would not be a good idea to add count to all of these because it's going to just count those things instead of returning the actual data. So, but what's nice about this is it allows you to give you, if you're not familiar with SQL Map, or you may have a really complex request, and instead of typing all of this stuff out, like for example, view state, being able to just copy and paste this right out of here into your command line works. Now, somebody just asked, where did we get that command from? I'm assuming you're saying, where did we get the SQL Mapper command, or where we got the request from? The request. All I did was go over to the proxy history, and I selected the post from the login. If you haven't done a post, you won't see that. We just did that login for ourselves. And then we right click and say send to SQL Mapper. See that right there?
And you only have that if you have the CO2 extension installed, right?
Exactly.
If you don't have it installed, you won't see that option.
Exactly. And so that gives us that whole thing. And it's kind of nice, right? We can actually start saying, one of the cool things here that James will whine about because he didn't have it. So it says pin to database or pin to table, allows you to only go after a single database inside of the MySQL or the backend database or whatever. James had this problem with a company he was pen testing.
No, I didn't really have a problem. Kevin's referring to, I was doing a pen test, and it was a site that was hosted on a fairly large web hosting company's server. And when we went in, I found a SQL injection flaw in the application. I used SQL Map. I started going in. I looked at the databases that existed, and let's just say there's a large number of databases out there, and one of them happened to be one for a company I used to work for. So I knew immediately who I was dealing with. And but as we do what we do, I only stuck to my database that I was attacking. Went in, pulled the data,
right,
got out, and then of course, like 10 minutes later or something like that, they decided they were going to block my IP address for 3 months.
And he whined every day. It's still blocked.
Yeah, it was horrible. But, again, and that's something we have to think about when we get into sites like that, right? As we start exploiting flaws, making sure that we're staying within the scope of the test, right? Seeing all those other databases out there. Okay, yeah, there's a whole bunch of databases out there. Now, the account I was exploiting didn't have access to them. Not saying that I possibly couldn't have later, but knowing that, hey, these are other databases, stay away from them. I'm only manipulating this one is kind of paramount to what we're doing when we're in there, so we don't do anything destructive.
So hop around to some of these other.
So we go to user generator tab to be able to go in and generate usernames.
Right, and we can actually just start pulling in. Here's pulling first names and last names from various locations. Right, we're actually pulling this data out, coming back from out on the internet. It's coming out with cases of words. If I recall correctly, he got this from the census data, didn't he?
I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think that was where he got it from, was the census data that's available online. Now, one of the things to keep in mind is that the census data he's going to pull is from the US, whereas you may be testing a site that's based somewhere else, right? And so you want to think about that. We also have the mangler that we can actually pull things in. One of the things we see is to get like, hey, I'm K Johnson 26 because I'm the 27th person with the initial K and the last name Johnson, right? Or if a company just does Johnson, right? My twin brother and I have the same first initial and last name, and so a lot of times we would have issues signing into a system because they forced you. This will actually start pushing year and numeric suffixes based on those lists, and then add various domains. So if you're attacking professionalevil.com, if the logins are name@professionalevil.com, well, you're going to add that domain to all of the stuff. We also have Cool. Cool is a great tool. I'm not sure if Robin made it to the webcast, but he'll probably be listening to the recording if he didn't. This is a tool that I love. It's the simplest idea is that I want to go spider a website and create a word list based on the content of that website. I can't tell you the number of times that somebody's the project they're part of is their password or the name of the company. I compromised a company once. The administrative password for their Cold Fusion login was the company slogan that was on the footer of every single page. And so by using something like Cool, which is the common word list generator, it'll actually spider the website and parse it. And here what you've got is, hey, let's pull it from this site, right? The minimum word I want to extract is 3 characters, and you can adjust that, right? You can also maximum word size. I don't want to go with anything higher than 20 words. I'm going to force it to lowercase or not. I can ignore common words. So and, a, the, of, right? Ignore style tags and script tags. One of the things that isn't in here that Cool has, and I'm not sure if Jason's looking to do it, is that Cool actually pull from the EXIF data on graphics, right? So you'll get some data that way, which is kind of nice. And then I click extract words, and it starts bloop, pulled the website through, and there is a list of potential words. And of course, if we came in here and said force to lowercase, extract words, everything else. And then we can actually save this word list out, or we can cut and paste it into the other tools, right? A lot of cool things available there. Simple process, right? Like I said, a simple idea, but really, really nice. Okay. This is a whole bunch of payload generators, right? It will mangle up the various words, change them to alphanumeric, whatever. Also, you've got your ASCII payloads. Hey, what is to ASCII decimal, right? What do I want to change it to? What have you. This is one that I've never gotten to work as part of CO2. Like, plain and simple.
I just installed it and I couldn't get it to work, and
right.
Gilliam's actually on vacation right now.
So we can't ask him. The only plugin I've ever used other than CO2 is this JS Beautifier, right? And when you install it, here's all your config options and everything else. What you're able to do is, let's go find, that's a good one, jQuery.
Oh yeah, jQuery is going to be good. Look at that.
Try reading that, right?
That's ugly. It's not beautiful.
And so what you're able to do is you're actually able to say, where is it? beautify this. You click that. Now,
take some patience.
Yeah, it takes a minute.
Get a cup of coffee.
Says text is read only. A new window will be open shortly. Okay.
Well, that actually went pretty quick.
Well, it always seems to pop that up right before it's done, right? Like it doesn't pop that pop-up at the beginning of the process, which is where you want to have the, wait, this is going to take a minute, right? And now there is that entire JS file. Now I want to be clear, it doesn't give you, like, it doesn't change the obfuscation such as, the function is called C, right? It doesn't change that, but it does break it out so it's not just one big run-on sentence, right? Which is kind of nice. You can actually come in here and change what the doc type is if you wanted to. I've never seen a purpose to that, and you can copy it out to the clipboard so you can start using it if you wanted to review it, do things like that with it, right? Somebody said, how do we get a URL added to the extract from list in Cooler? It seriously is just there, right? It's based on the last thing you had selected. Because see how we've got the Ajax libs jQuery thing? So coming back over to that beautifier, no, that's content discovery. Did I close that?
Probably.
Yeah, I must have.
You did. Nice going.
Yeah, I'm bad that way. Now, one of the things, since we're talking about JS, let's talk about the new DOM-based static analysis, right? This is another feature that was added since the last time we ran this webinar. Kind of a neat feature. The new versions of Burp, if you're using the professional version, the free version is not. I just noticed that you're running 1.6.05.
Sorry.
Isn't there a new version?
Yeah, 1.6.05.
Is that the newest? Why did I think it was all the way up to .10?
I don't know. Maybe you were on the beta release list or something.
I don't know. I doubt that.
Because I just installed that today.
Okay, well then I don't know. But so we have the active scanner, right? And in this case, James actually ran the active scanner so we could see stuff going on here. No big deal. We don't typically use the active scanner. Like James will say that he never uses it. I'll use the active scanner periodically for a single page. Like if I find a page that has lots of parameters and I find like cross-site scripting on one of the parameters, I'll throw that page to the scanner to see if the other parameters are as I move on to find other things. But I never just say scan the entire site. But there's a new feature, and that is under options all the way down, static code analysis. Now, by default, it's set here, active scanning only. So only if you're active scanning a page will it do this static analysis. And to me, that's a mistake because there isn't a way to say, thank you. There isn't a way to say, send this to the active static code analysis where we can, right? Like over here, we could actually say, let's just pick one of these requests, right? We can actually come here and say, do an active scan. And say, go, boom, done. The problem is that's going to actively scan as well as do that static analysis. So what we typically do when we play around with this, go back over to the scanner options, is we'll change this to active and passive scanning. Now, I want to warn you, this takes more memory than using the Burp normally. So I typically only do this static code analysis when I'm mapping the site, right? So as I'm just browsing it, I'm not doing anything malicious. I'm not sending attacks up or anything like that. And the reason I do that is I'm already mapping the site. So I'm already pulling things back and forth, but because I'm not doing I'm not launching Intruder and I'm not using Repeater and all this kind of stuff, my thought process is it takes up less RAM. I don't know if that's true. I've never actually measured it to see if I'm right. But then when I'm done mapping the site, I'll turn this back to active scanning only so that it doesn't keep running. And then I will start doing everything else that I do. And what I typically do is at that point, I shut down Burp and then relaunch Burp and load back up my session that I've saved so that I have all the findings. I've got all the requests and everything else like that. But there's no carryover in memory of that that static code analysis running. But this will actually find, and I've actually had it find a couple things I think I would have missed, DOM-based cross-site scripting and some stuff like that, which is kind of nice as you're dealing with stuff. Then of course you gotta go see if it's right and all that kind of stuff. You just gotta validate it the same way you validate everything else. Oh yeah, I know, it's awful.
Stop it.
So that would be the static code analysis, and it's kind of neat. I don't believe we found any. Yeah, you'll see that there's lots of things in here. Just to be clear, we did not attack any of these sites. This is all just from the passive scanner coming back, and this was James browsing around earlier to see the different things. He was just checking stuff. I just want to be clear. I just see somebody going, "Hey, wait a minute! They attacked Outbrain.com." No, we didn't. So, but on the site, right? We've got a number of things here. Private IP address disclosed. You've got SQL injection capabilities, right? File path traversal. Hey, that's kind of nice. If you look, sure enough, I happen to know this one's right. All the way at the bottom.
Look at that already.
I know. There. And there is the output of Etsy password coming back down, right? So what I'm going to do is swap seats so you can play with Intruder. You're better at Intruder than I am.
I'm better at Intruder.
Whatever.
Intruder is one of my more favorite tools to use. While I can't explain the 4 different types of intruding you can do.
That's why I'm here.
Where do we have? Where's that login? This one right here?
Yeah, the post.
Oh my goodness.
What are you just clicking randomly?
I know. That's what I do. All right, so Intruder, we'll go ahead and send. I'm going to send this request, even though it doesn't say the vuln on it. But it is a post for login on the same page, just the URL page of it. So we'll go ahead and say send to Intruder. This screen attack target, right? We never really touch anything on this. Usually stays the same. Rarely will you ever have to switch it to say use HTTPS or remove HTTPS from it, or change a host or anything like that. You may have to if you've changed environments, but that's usually the only time.
Yeah, and I very rarely do you change environments in the middle of testing.
Bug request number 9997. I don't know why this thing is trying to pre-populate the fields. Always go in and clear all of our tokens.
Yeah. So Burp tried to guess what parameters you would want to fuzz using Intruder. And basically it marks every parameter it can see. And
this is why. This is add the blog item. I don't want that.
Hold
on. Let me go back and get the right one.
The login. And so it tries to mark it for you. Like James just said, I've never in my life ever went, oh, hey, it got them all right. I always hit clear.
Yeah, it never gets it right. So here we'll clear them out. And so there's a bunch of things we can do with Intruder. We can try to pull information. We can try to look for vulnerabilities like SQL injection, or other attacks like that. We can look for username harvesting if we want to do that by looking at the responses that come back. So the first thing we can try here is actually just let's look for SQL injection. So that'll be kind of fun. So I'll just add a token.
A login form may be vulnerable to SQL injection? No.
It may be.
Oh, man.
Might as well try.
Say it is so.
It is so. So I'll highlight the password field and then just click add to add the token around it. And then we'll go into payloads. As somebody asked earlier, right, depending on the word list that you want to use, do we have any custom ones? As we stated, we really don't have custom ones that we use across the board. We'll use something like Cool or something similar to generate a word list that's more specific to the target that we're attacking. But for here, we can just use a simple list for SQL injection. If you've got the paid for version, there's actually a list already that's built for fuzzing for SQL injection. If you don't have it, If you've got something like FuzzDB or some other word list, then you can go in and select that list by clicking the load button and then going in and finding the file. It's just a regular text file. It'll import that data in, and then you can use that list. But I typically, if I'm doing SQL injection checks, it's going to be just the default list that comes with Burp. That seems to work fairly well when I use it. And as we can see here, there's a whole bunch of different lists that are available. Usernames, passwords, short words, directories, and file names. So if those are something you're trying to fuzz, maybe, make your own Durbuster by running a directory name or something like that, directory list through there. That's something else we can do. 3-letter words all the way up through 12-letter words. The list of HTTP verbs. So if I want to see what's available for that.
So what methods are available is what that is.
User agents, if we want to throw user agents in there. So we're going to leave this one as that. And that's really to get the default check. That's all we have to do. All right, that's come up to Intruder. We say start attack. Now, if you've got the free version and you run this, it limits to 1 request per second, which is kind of stinks. If you got the paid version, it should go fairly quick. And here we can see our responses and requests that came out. And usually what I'll do is I'll either sort by length or I'll sort by status to be able to see the difference, because that's usually going to give us an indicator of something that's happened. So if we do a sort by status, here we see a whole bunch of 302s, and then we see a whole bunch of 200s. Right, so then we can look at each one of those and see what they are. I don't want to just jump in there and tell you what they are because we already know. Right, but this one here with the 200, it's an error message. So we've got some sort of error message that came back. Here we can see if we click the render button, a little bit easier to read it. We've got a SQL error. So usually a good sign that we have SQL injection. But at the same time, if we look at the 302, we see that we're getting a 302 redirect, right? And it's now sending us over to index.php. It's setting some cookies, right? So there's a couple different things that this is doing for us that we weren't seeing in the 200s, indicating that we've bypassed login. And we've successfully pulled off SQL injection, at least to bypass the login portion.
Right. Which, of course, means other issues, right? We can send that to SQL Mapper and stuff like that.
Right. At this point, I mean, we'd probably definitely send it to SQL Mapper and be like, woohoo, let's take advantage of this.
And this is one of the examples where, having done this, if we had told the session handling to update the cookie, now as we browsed through Burp, we would be the admin, right? Because Burp is going to use that new cookie instead of the one that was set originally.
Right. So just a good example of how we can go and use it. Now keep in mind that we're using this to identify SQL injection, not really to exploit it. While we did log in and got the 302 redirect, we're just really doing this to identify it. And I've had to do this before where I've been on a site and I know something's not right about the login screen, but manually it just wasn't triggering.
Yeah.
And I loaded this up, and sure enough, it showed me like 15 different SQL syntax things we could put in there that had the effect that I was looking for.
Yeah.
Right. But it had, it was one of those where it had to have a clothing parenthesis and then this and then that. And, it was just a funky way of doing it. But it was just hard to get it to trigger. And then once we get it to trigger, then we can switch over and start using this. Another cool thing that we have with Intruder is if we start looking at how we can extract data from it. So if we go into the Options tab within Intruder, down at the bottom, or almost at the bottom, we've got this grep extract where we can say, hey, I want to extract some data from this. And it's come a long way with what you can do for this. Before, it used to be actually to type in your own dang regex to figure out where to put it.
Oh, yeah.
Now we don't have to. So if there's something specific that we're looking for, maybe there's I'm looking for cookies being set, so I can see what's going on. right? And we'll go ahead and actually modify this because it might not have a set cookie after it. But what this is going to do is it's going to look at all the responses, and if it's got a set cookie, it's going to pull that data out so we can see the cookies that exist when we run through this. So we just click OK, and now we've got this extracted data. Now we can use this to pull, if you find like a profile page that's got name, address, all kinds of information on it, you can actually set up a bunch of these grep extracts and pull it out and save it as a CSV when you're done. And now you've got an entire list of harvested data that would have been much more difficult to get by going through and trying to manually pull that data out. So if we go back in, let me make sure I killed out the other one. And we'll go ahead and we'll say start attack. And notice this time that we actually see that username equals Jardine, username equals admin, username equals burp is frozen. There we are. And now we can actually sort on the cookie, right, and see these differences that are in here. And notice that the first one, the baseline is Jardine because we actually did a valid login for my account. Whereas when we did the SQL injection attack, it's dropping that and just logging as the first user that comes back. Right. So a little bit different there. But once we get that information out, then we can come up here and the save, and we can say, oh, let's save the results table. We can select the columns that we want to save. So maybe here the only thing we want is the cookie value. You can say save a header row. We'll do tab delimited. Yeah, okay. Let's go up to desktop.
You have a folder called desktop on your desktop?
I do.
There's so many rude comments I could make about that. Is there a folder called desktop in the folder called desktop
I don't
on
think
your
so.
desktop?
No.
Okay, just checking.
The reason I have a desktop folder though is because when I'm doing videos like or
You shove
webinars, I shove everything from
yeah.
my desktop into the desktop folder.
Yeah. See, I have a folder called hold on my desktop that does the same thing. So now one of the things that I've used this for is for when you're brute forcing usernames and passwords. Let's say you don't have valid usernames or valid passwords, and you want to do a test where you say, I want to try every potential username with a password of password or password one, or you've worked for one of those companies that do change me as the default password or remote me 33 or something. So run a brute force, and then as it comes through, let's say it sets a cookie that says role equals. Well, I don't want to log in as all the normal users. I want to focus on the ones that say role equals admin or role equals super or something, right? And so grepping for that cookie that comes back or that hidden form value or whatever, now I get a list, and then I would do an output that put the payload, so I know what username and what password were set. What username was set. I know the password because I was trying the same one. And then I list out the roles, and I know what role each person who I brute forced in. Because if you've got a normal user that has a password of password, that's bad. But if you have an admin user that has a password of password, that's even better.
Right. So here you can see the file that we opened up, right? And it's got that whole list that came out from that scan. So, it is another good way to be able to kind of harvest data out of the site without going in to have to do it manually. So we'll get rid of that. The other tool that we have that we're going to talk about was Repeater. So if we go ahead and take this same request and send it over to Repeater, again, this is where we're going to be able to go ahead and send up some of our command, our attack payloads, but not have to worry about all the other crap that comes back down with the site. So it makes it much more efficient. We're not going through the browser. We're not switching tools. It's all right here within Burp. The first thing we do, we run the initial request that we have just to make sure that things are working as we expect them to work. Here we expected that it would actually log us in. We'd get a 302, and we can see that we're doing that. And the reason we want to run it is to make sure that our cookie hasn't timed out, right? Our sessions haven't timed out, anything like that, and that we're good to go. then we can come in here and start actually manipulating the parameters that exist. So we can come in here and say, well, let's see what happens if we put a single quote in the password field. And we can look. And a lot of times before I run it, I'll actually look at the size down here in the bottom corner to see that right now it's 43,981 bytes. So I'll have kind of a rough estimate of the size. So when I run it again, I can quickly look down there and see, has anything major changed, at least in the length. So if we hit go, I mean, we changed by 2,000 bytes our size. So right there, that's something quite different for one character difference. And again, here, rendering it makes it a little bit easier to see the error message. I rarely actually render, but for some stuff like this, I'll render it just so you can see a little bit easier. I'm usually fairly comfortable looking at it just like this, but that's from years of development. So I'm used to looking at HTML in its ugly form. It's like the Matrix, man. All I see is a lady in a red dress, right? But whatever. Man. you know a reference like that was coming out.
I did.
Right, so now we can see, oh, wait a minute, we've got some error here in our SQL syntax. So we didn't have to go to Intruder to run that. And oftentimes I'll run stuff through Repeater to identify something, and then if I have trouble there, or if I do identify something right, I can then move it to Intruder for kind of that next step. Even though we showed you Intruder first, oftentimes I'm doing Repeater first and kind of toying around with it. Is there really a problem here? What are the chances? Oh yeah, I see something, let me move it over to take advantage of it. Same thing with username harvesting. I can do that through Repeater to make the two requests, valid username, invalid username, and then throw it into Intruder to actually do the harvesting. And a lot of times we're not even, may not even be that successful as far as harvesting usernames, but what we're trying to do is determine, is there really any protection against harvesting usernames, right? Just because you're able to tell a difference between a valid and invalid user doesn't mean that they don't have something that stops you after 5 attempts, or they've got some sort of monitoring in place that they let us know that, hey, look, we caught you at, that you were running this stuff. Because as I mentioned at the beginning of this webcast, we're looking for more than just, hey, I was able to get into your application and get to your database and steal credit card information, right? We want to see, what are you doing for security and how can we help you better that? So that way, if we do run something like an automated tool, that you're actually able to identify it and understand what it's doing and how to defend against it. And a lot of times we'll get people that'll try to push it off that, oh, well, I got something that after 5 attempts, right? Okay, we saw that. Or 2,000 attempts, right? I'll usually run maybe 2,000, 3,000 attempts.
Yeah.
And that's good enough for me. If I can run 2,000 attempps.
And you didn't notice?
And you didn't block me, Yeah. And we've had people come back, oh, well, at 3,000 attempts, we block you.
Really? That's sufficient for you? I always love some of the arguments you get into with people. Like, my favorite still is James photoshopping the cross-site scripting.
I can't help it. We had a client that actually accused me of photoshopping an alert box onto a page to say there was cross-site scripting. Now, I want to be very clear. I don't get paid by the number of vulnerabilities I find. I'm not a researcher.
I knew researcher was coming.
That was messed up. But, right, we don't get paid by the number of vulnerabilities. It doesn't benefit me either way to have 1 vulnerability or 10 vulnerabilities in the report.
Not necessarily we would prefer more just because we like more.
Well, it made it look like we did better.
Yeah.
But, this happens, right? I mean, people, oh, you Photoshopped that. No, I didn't. I wish I was that good at Photoshop that I could, but I'm not. So some other issues on this page that we could look at, right? Because as we're in here messing around with Repeater, looking at things, we see the page equals up here on the URL, where we can start messing with this. We can go ahead and assume that, this is pulling in the page directly. But because it says page equals login.php, well, what if we, start messing with this and say, let's see what happens if we try to add another file and we do like Etsy password. as the page, right? And when we're coming into a site, we don't know if this is going to work or not. But that's the whole purpose of while we're going in testing is trial and error. Let me go ahead. We'll run it. As you can see, it was actually successful. I was still in render, so it was easier to see it. If you're not in render and you're in the raw, it's way down at the bottom. Here it is way down here. It was actually funny. We were in Vegas last year, and we were doing a little internal burp training set, kind of like this. I mean, very similar to this, but it was just a bunch of us together, showing different ways we do things. And I went ahead and we were doing this exact example, and I did it. And I'm looking, and I was like, man, it didn't work. I don't understand. And I'm looking at this screen. I'm like, what the heck?
I know, it's vulnerable.
And somebody asked me, they're like, well, do you ever use the render tab? And I was like, not really, not usually. And sure enough, I click on it, and there, popped right up at the top. And I was like, oh, you got to be kidding me. The one time I say, I don't really use that. It was the saving grace to my deal. So there is a question in here about what happened with Burp and view state that is Mac 2.0. I'm not really sure what happened with it.
I don't understand the question.
Is it not able to decode it? I haven't seen an issue with any view state dealing with within Burp.
You can explain the question a little bit better.
Yeah, so if you can provide more information, or if you got some examples or something where you can send a screenshot, you feel free to send it to me at james@securideas.com. But I haven't seen any issues with view state.
I mean, if Mac's enabled, Burp isn't going to be able to change it, right?
Yeah, I mean, if Mac's enabled, you can't modify it. But I'm curious if when Mac's enabled, if it's not able to decode it. That'd be interesting to see.
I
don't know.
No, I'm not sure off the top of my head. I was about to say, yeah, I can decode it, but now I'm not. I'm trying to think of the last time I saw a view state that actually had Mac enabled that we were testing.
What? All the view state I ever see has Mac enabled. Almost every time Mac's enabled.
Well, in that case, you can decode it because you can decode it.
I know, but
okay.
You realize that we can hear that, right?
Yes.
Okay. Just if you're wondering if that scrubbing sound in the background, that's Kevin wiping off the boards because apparently he's
I needed to.
bored or something.
So let's pop over to the web services then.
What else?
So if we come over to the Firefox again, you'll notice under Matilda, there's actually a
web services.
And then SOAP, and then you've got command injection, right? Let's play with that one, right? DNS lookup. If we go there, we pop over to a page. Now I want to be very clear. Go back real quick.
Nope.
This page is not the WSDL. For people who don't know, a WSDL is the web service definition language, right? Excuse me. This is just a default page to say, hey, we have a web service. There is a link to the WSDL. So somebody asked what the black. Oh, in the system menu. That's Alfred.
Yeah, it's Alfred.
Somebody asked what the black hat in their system menu in the system area was. He assumes it's something fancy. No, it's not. It's Alfred.
Also, the question as to why is it easier to use Repeater first, then Intruder from start to finish? Intruder looks more comprehensive.
Intruder is more comprehensive.
Yes, Intruder is more comprehensive. And honestly, usually the reason I'm using Repeater first is Repeater's just the first place I'll send something, just to kind of throw some quick jabs at it, right? Before I actually decide, we use like a boxing analogy, before I throw like a undercut or a big hook at it.
Oh, jeez.
Kevin's lost right now. It's athletics, and he just doesn't know what I'm talking about.
So you mean like when you get a touchdown in basketball with the puck?
Yes, that.
Got it.
I find it easier to throw stuff into Repeater and kind of play with some of the values before I then identify, because I'll usually identify something in Repeater, then move it over to Intruder. Otherwise, you're going to Intruder, you're picking one point at a time most likely, and then you're just throwing crap at it to see if something comes back, and that just it doesn't seem as efficient.
Yeah, because you have to then clear out the intruder results and then do it again and clear it out, do it again, for each of the parameters on the page. Whereas with Repeater, you can just bounce back and hit it again, hit it again, hit it again. It's just much faster to do that initial discovery. Or even if you don't find the injection point, you've got a good idea the injection point is there that way. So this is the WSDL. And most times when you come across a SOAP-based web service, the WSDL is visible to you because SOAP-based web services were designed in the hippie-free love era of the internet with the idea that we're going to share data and share applications and everybody can communicate to everybody else. And so it's a way to self-document what that web service provides, right? What functions. And so if you just append $WSDL, WSDL, in some technologies it has to be all capitals for WSDL. It just depends. You're going to get a WSDL back. Now, if for some reason you have a SOAP-based web service that is not giving you the WSDL, we recommend that you ask the client for a request and a response that is valid for every function that web service offers, or just keep browsing the website, because in most cases that you have a web service like that, either there's documentation somewhere, right? Because this is an externally exposed API that they want people to write programs toward and against, or you've got some client-side application, be it a JavaScript or be it Java or Flash, that's making calls to that web service, and then you can actually capture the calls. But if there is a WSDL like this, what we're going to do is we're going to cut and paste that or copy and paste that into a tool called soapUI. Now soapUI is a commercial tool. There is a free version of it, and the free version is good enough for what we're doing, but there is a free version. There is a commercial version that does a whole bunch of other stuff. And what we're going to do is we're going to go into the preferences. We're then going to select the proxy settings. And in almost every one of our cases, we're going to use localhost and port 8080, which is Burp's port and listener, right? Now, you don't want to have intercept turned on. Remember how Burp can do interception? You probably shouldn't have intercept turned on anyways. But if it's on, it will actually break soapUI's ability to load the WSDL. It just times out too fast. And so what we're going to do is we're going to say a new project, and we're going to give it a name, whatever you want to call it, right? We're going to call this one test, and then we're going to give it the initial WSDL URL, and that's that one that we just pasted. And notice that it checked a box that said create sample requests, right? What that's going to do is it's actually going to build out, based on the WSDL, what requests are useful in this web service, right? And so in this case, we're going to say, okay. And you'll know it worked because you'll have a series of menu options, in that tree that weren't there before. Notice James expanded them all the way down to request 1, since this web service only provides a single request. And there is the SOAP request that needs to be made to that web service. Now, toward the middle of that request, there's a question mark. James is highlighting it right now. That is where our parameter goes. So what we want to run. Now, this is a command injection web service. So we're going to replace the question mark with an ls, -l.
Not normally what I would do, but we'll do it.
Why not?
Because I don't modify it here.
Oh, okay. I do. Because I want to see both the request and response, right? And so once we do that, now if we do what James was just saying, he just leaves it as a question mark and hits play, you're just not going to get a good response back, right? It's going to be empty.
Well, it's a valid response.
So yeah, it didn't do anything. soapUI, think of it as the same way as we use Repeater. Right? It's going to make a request, get a response, make a request, get a response. And that's all that it does, right? Now, the commercial version has test cases you can build and all this kind of stuff. The only time I ever use soapUI is when I've stumbled across a WSDL that's part of the application I'm testing, but I wasn't told beforehand it was there. If I'm told beforehand there's a web service, there's a whole series of questions we ask, we get requests and responses, we get, because we've actually had to build custom applications to test against APIs. But if I stumble across one, like we would have if we just started testing Matilda, I'm going to load the WSDL this way. Now, we got back our request and our response, kind of interesting, great. Then what we do, because we did this whole thing through Burp, is we go over to Burp.
Yeah, I mean, when I'm testing, I'd be done with soapUI right now.
Yeah, well, when I'm testing also, right? The only reason we'd still be in soapUI for me is if there were other functions that web service provided other than just the one. In this case, there was only one, and you'll notice the request right there.
And we have the request with the question mark and the response, right? The same stuff we saw inside of soapUI.
Right.
Minus the headers. Because soapUI doesn't show those. So at this point, right, we take this over and send it to Repeater. So then we can start messing with this question mark, right? So we send it, make sure we get the same result back, right? Can't find question mark. So now we can start.
Try localhost, because it's a DNS lookup, right?
We put in localhost.
Come back, and we get a DNS response. Now we want to try what happens if we do ls. Shouldn't do anything successfully, right? Okay, no such server, doesn't have an answer, no big deal. But what happens if we did that as semicolon ls? So the semicolon terminates the previous command, right? And there's our ls. Hey, kind of cool. Command injection. I wonder what was the hint.
I don't know, the name?
Yeah, maybe. I always love. I was talking to somebody once, and they were joking around, and they said, "Man, it really sucked. I learned all this web pen testing stuff against these target apps. Then I started doing real pen tests, and none of the apps I tested named files like SQLinjection.php or CommandInjection.aspx." And it was like, you're right. That does suck. Wouldn't it be nicer if people did that for us? So, but now we have all of the power of Burp, right? We can use Intruder against this. We can use Repeater. Now, one of the things, if you come over here, and right from here, we're just going to say, send to Repeater. Right? I'm sorry, send to Intruder. Come over to Intruder. Notice it marked all of these different parameters, right? Again, this is one of those cases where Burp has gone way above what we would normally want to fuzz. It's very rare that you're going to fuzz the XSI type of a value, right? It's rare. It's very rare that you're going to fuzz the encoding of the SOAP environment, right? Different things like that. So again, we're going to say clear. I'm sorry. Because I had them highlighted. It only cleared the one I highlighted. And then we're going to come in here and we're going to mark this semicolon ls. Add. That one's marked. Coming over here, you've got the different lists. I find quite often that this is going to be one of the few places we're going to use illegal Unicodes. This is one where FuzzDB has a whole series of payloads specifically for SOAP-based parameters, right? SOAP-based web services and things like that. And then we get all of that functionality right in here. We still got the scanner that's running. Hey, this is here. Let's jump down to vuln. Since we've been doing this through here. So the web services, we still have all the information. The scanner is still working. Now, in the scanner, it does have SOAP injections. So it will do things like external entity attacks in the active scanner. And this is one of the few places where I say to people, if you're just starting out with testing web services, Burp's active scanner does have some decent tests for SOAP-based stuff. But you got to be careful because automated tools very often will just go further than you want them to or cause issues because of what they're doing. But if you're not super familiar with SOAP-based services, that might help you a little bit as you're practicing and learning. Because one of the things I find is if you use the active scanner against something like Matilda or DVWA or what have you, and then evaluate the results from the active scanner, it can actually show you, because it shows, hey, here's the request I sent, here's the response I got, this is why. I'm going to give you a good description of this is why I think this is SQL injection, and it enables you to pick up that information and learn a little bit more about what that vulnerability means, right? And so as you start to deal with new vulnerabilities coming out, just keep in mind that most new vulnerabilities that come out aren't new. They're just some name somebody else has called the same exact thing we've been testing forever. My favorite one to spin James up is blind XSS.
Yep, they always spin me up. It's good when people come up with new stuff. I love it.
So, what's the next thing we want to cover?
That's our entire list.
Well, another thing that we were looking at just recently, an article came out, and now I can't remember where the article was. I feel bad because
that's right. You printed it, didn't you?
No, I printed the graphics. We had the reference. I don't want to take credit because we didn't come up with this. This was I've got it on my window right here. Let me pull it up.
And this, go ahead.
It's a blog out at codewatch.org. Recently, a Fortify staff member came out with a report on different ways to bypass web app firewalls that I thought were kind of interesting. I lean towards saying they're interesting because why the heck would that work? But they do, right? And what they found was that a lot of web app firewalls will ignore things that originate from localhost. Now, for anybody on this webcast that knows how networking works, you would assume that localhost would be a network setting they were paying attention to, right? Like, what was the source IP address of this? They're not. They're actually looking at headers in the HTTP request that are set by various proxies or things like that. And so what they found is that if you do something like a request header of x-originating-IP and gave it a value of 127.0.0.1, the web app firewall ignored your attack. Now, making that change over and over and over again, that's kind of difficult, right? So what you can actually do is add them automatically to the proxy. So you go to the proxy, you go to options, right? And you add in the match and replace right here, right? We can actually say add a request header. Now you got to make sure it's a request header and not a response header. For some reason, a lot of people are so used to focusing on response headers. They immediately click there. Don't do that. It's a request header, right? You say a request header, leave the match blank, right? It even says this will add, right, a new header. And then just come in here and you can say, typed X generating IP and give it a colon, if I could type, 127.0.0.1. And you can put a comment if you wanted to say, bypass WAF or whatever, say okay, and notice that's now down at the bottom. And you could add another one that was X forwarded for, right? And again, colon space 127.0.0.1, right? And you've got X forwarded for, you've got originating IP, you've got remote dash IP, or a remote dash adder are all ones that would be available. Of course, you do the X dash because they're quote unquote experimental. They're not formal standard headers, right? And by adding those automatically to every request, you bypass a large number of WAFs, which is sad somehow. It bothers me that would work because the WAF should be smart enough to know, hey, this isn't coming from localhost, right? It bothers me that works, but that will get you past a WAF. And so you can start to actually access stuff and not have the WAF block your attacks. Now, I have not found where that has allowed you to get access to things that are locked down to localhost. Like, IIS has, I don't know if the new versions of IIS has, but it used to be there was a web console in IIS, but you had to be on the local box to see it, right? That won't give you access to that kind of stuff, not in any case I've found, right? And then, of course, when you're done, you just click that off and you move on from there. Make sense?
Or you just leave it enabled all the time, just in case.
I tend to feel like if you're doing something that's going to bypass a WAF, leaving it enabled all the time would be bad. I don't know. Somebody say that you're attacking them or something like that, right? Now, one of the questions that we were asked at the very beginning of the webcast, we didn't answer it. And to be blunt, the reason I'm not going to answer is I don't have an answer. The person asked if we were going to cover macros inside of Burp because they had trouble getting macros to work. My answer would be no, because I've never used macros inside of Burp. Have you?
I'm thinking I tried to use them once, and I also had trouble getting them to work. So yeah, I really haven't messed with macros.
Yeah, I've never dealt with them ever. Does anybody on the webcast? I mean, I'll throw that out there to everybody else. Maybe somebody else has an idea. Yeah, because I'm going to scroll back up just to make sure I got the question right. Yeah, if you use Burp all the time but never get macros to work effectively, any tips would be great. I'd like to replay authentication for those annoying apps which log you out for tampering and fuzzing. And I agree. That's the whole point of the macro, right? Is, oh, I lost my session. It'll automatically replay the login sequence to get our session back. And of course, that ties back to that session handling thing we talked about at the beginning. But I've never played with them. I've never gotten them working. So, oh well. It wasn't a great answer, I don't think.
We'll work on that for the next one. Figure that out.
Really, you gonna promise that? You're gonna figure
I didn't
out
say I promised anything.
Oh, see, that implies.
Did anybody hear promise come out of my mouth before I said I didn't say I'd promise anything? No, you did not. Oh, we got a hand up. And down. All right, so it looks like we have come to the end of the presentation.
Was that like French or something?
Like half French.
Okay, half French. So in that case, we want to say thank you to everybody for coming on board. Please don't hesitate. Email us at Kevin or James at Secure Ideas. We'll get to both of us. Either of us. We'll get to both of us.
Kevin or James at SecureIdeas.com will get to both of us.
Yeah.
You should set that up.
We should set that up. If you send it to info@, it'll get to all of us. I will say, I hope to see you guys either at DerbyCon. We're going to be out there.
It's going to be awesome.
We'll be teaching a class. We'll be at Boston, the HIMSS Privacy and Security event. What's that, in 2 weeks? We're going to be in Boston for a couple of days. It's not
next week, the week after.
Yeah, next week I'm going to be in New York for that AT&T event, but I'm literally flying in and flying out, right? Are we planning on releasing an online course at some point? An online course about what? And yes, I will be at AppSec USA. I'm teaching a class there with Jason Gillum.
Who wrote CO2.
So we can give him crud there at the class. He will be staying for the rest of AppSec. I'm going to be flying straight home right after the class. We have discussed, we do a 4-day web pen testing course. We have discussed offering it online. We just haven't before setting that up. Yeah. If you're interested, send us an email to show us an interest, and we'll probably do it sooner.
That is true. Yeah.
Yep. Great. Love to see you to stop by and say hi. Because we'll be out of Denver. 2 of us, Gillum and I'll be out in Denver. Do it online in Argentina. Why would we have to be in Argentina to do it online? Or come to Echo Party? Argentina is a little far for me to fly.
That's why he said do it online.
Well, but he said in Argentina, which implies I'm going to be
No, he said
Oh, I
do it
misread
online.
that.
I'm in
Oh,
Argentina.
I missed the I'm.
Don't worry, it's time for Kevin's prescription to get updated for his glasses.
When we'll be in Denver, and whatever days AppSec USA are, we'll be in Denver. And I apologize until Delta's app tells me I have a ticket the next day. I don't remember dates. I think that's like in 3 weeks.
Somewhere around there, I think.
Yeah, and we'll be at AppSec USA.
There you go.
Yep,
September
somebody just said September 16th through 19th. So yeah, that's when we'll be there. So great. Well, thank you very much, everybody. And like we said, we're going to set up this recording and we'll get you out a link sometime early to mid next week for you to download it.
All right. Thanks, everybody.